on X, you call yourself NutritionNerd, and I asked you straight up, I guess, like, do you acknowledge that veganism is at least adequate? And it seems we're on the same terms with that. You do see veganism as nutritionally adequate, and it's providing you take certain supplements for certain nutrients as well. But ultimately, you believe that we absolutely can be vegan. There's no reason we can't be vegan nutritionally, right?
Yeah, I'd agree in general. I think supplementation is needed probably for at least B12 and a few other key nutrients you could probably benefit from. I think for adults, there's no real argument against it. I think for infants and very young children, most formulas do need the use of animal products to be nutritionally adequate. But past the age of, 10 or so, I think veganism is fully nutritionally sound.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I guess I would have some pushbacks maybe about the infancy stuff, but I'm not like nutrition isn't really my key thing. I'd probably pass you on to someone else about the infancy stuff. But I guess we're here mainly today to talk about the ethics then, right?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. Well, I guess the question I'd ask you is, if you are convinced that you could be vegan, what is it that you would make you not buy the plant products instead of the animal products, knowing what happens to animals in these industries, assuming you do know?
Well, I'm not sold on the notion that the consumption of animal products is unethical. Is the main reason why I wouldn't be vegan.
Sure. Okay. Okay, it's hard to know where to start with these things because I don't know when I'm speaking to someone how much it is they know about what happens in each industry. But maybe we could go from there. How much do you know about how each kind of industry works with regards to animal exploitation? So like dairy, eggs, meat, all that kind of stuff.
Well, what I'd say right off the bat is I'm fully in agreement that the treatment of animals in most of these practices is absolutely abhorrent, and I do not in any way stand by it. But I think that's a separate case to make than saying that we should go vegan. I think there are numerous exceptions and instances where it is perfectly ethical to consume animal products, and that is why I am not currently and likely never will be fully vegan.
Okay, cool. Well, hopefully by the end of this, maybe I'd convince you otherwise. But
I would be delighted. That would be a great outcome. So
awesome. Well, I'm glad you're open-minded. That's good. Okay, well, look, I think then you share probably just the common view that the average person has. You see factory farming as morally abhorrent. You see the horrific treatment that you see of animals in these videos with the pigs in the sow stalls and stuff and all that kind of stuff, and the chickens in the tiny cages. You probably see that, I would imagine, as morally abhorrent, right?
Exactly.
Cool. But there's certain ways of doing animal farming that you would say it can be done ethically, I guess, is your position.
Yes, I'd say there are certainly instances where the consumption of animal products in various contexts can be ethical. I think pretty much any mass scale production of animal products is almost always immoral.
Yeah.
But I think, for instance, my family no longer does, but we used to own a bunch of chickens.
Yeah.
And I do not see any logical argument that would lead to us not eating the eggs, for instance.
Okay, is it when you're talking about that, do you mean like the kind of backyard egg stuff? Like you have chickens in your back garden and they lay eggs, kind of just naturally lay them, and you just eat the eggs that they lay, kind of thing? Okay, yeah. Now, the backyard eggs thing, there is a vegan stance on that, but it's probably a very long-winded and boring conversation to have. That's a bit of a philosophical gray area, right? Because to the average person who's not even convinced so far that they shouldn't even buy shop-bought eggs, providing they're, I don't know, free range and this and that, it's going to be a very, very, very hard sell for me to talk about backyard eggs and why that would be unethical, because that's going to be a hugely philosophical kind of gray area to most people to go into. I think what I'd like to convince you first of is why just funding the animal farming industry would be immoral, if you would be interested in talking about that.
Well, I'm not sure you need to convince me of that. I think I'm already sold on that idea. I think every step we take away from that is great progress, and I don't think I need to be convinced of that.
Okay, is there any? I assume though you are buying animal products from the shop.
The shop is a little bit of an odd way of putting it, but yes, I do.
And when you go to restaurants, you would order, like, you know, the steak or the pizza or the lasagna or whatever, right?
Funnily enough, I don't really eat out, so that's a weird exception. But yes, I would consume animal products.
Okay. All right. I guess I'll just ask you, why is it that you would do that? Do you see an ethical problem with doing that?
Depending on the context, yes.
Okay. In what context would you find buying an animal product from the store or eating at a restaurant ethical? Let's say you were to like order a steak at a restaurant, or you were to buy a box of eggs at a supermarket. Under what circumstances would you consider that ethical?
I'm not sure I would consider it ethical to buy it from a conventional grocery store, knowing what these animals have gone through. Though I think, ethical or not ethical is a little bit of a false dichotomy in my view. I think it's more sliding a scale of, this is better than that, which is better than that, and so on down the line.
Okay, what is it essentially then that I would need to convince you of in order for you to stop buying animal products?
A lot, I suppose.
All right, tell me, let's go.
Well, mainly, I'm not entirely sold that it's inherently harmful for me to buy yogurt or eggs or dairy products from a local farm. We lived down the street from a small dairy farm, and I'm not at all sold on the idea that it is unethical for us to buy milk from that farm. I've seen the way the cows are treated, and I am not convinced that it is a bad thing.
Cool. All right. Yeah, let's talk about that. Again, I think that you come from the same position as most non-vegans would come from, right? You would see the factory farm and say, this is awful, like the government, whatever, should shut this down, or I would avoid buying from this place if I knew, and blah, blah, blah. But you see that, that beautiful picturesque little local farm and the cows running around, and you see kind of no ethical issue with that, right?
Yeah, I think that's about right. And that's my main hang up with veganism, is I think a lot of what it pushes is very good, and I emphatically agree with it. But I think it just takes it a step too far to bounds that I'm not sure are logically compelling.
Sure. Okay. Are you aware of what happens from start to finish to the calves, to cows and their calves in the dairy industry, including at these, picturesque local farms where the cows have lots of space to run around, and it's labeled as like humane, certified, and high welfare? Do you know kind of the process from start to finish of what happens?
I'm not especially well educated, no.
Great. Well, to be honest, I think I could potentially probably convince you then in that case, because if it's just the case that you weren't sure what happens, I think once I tell you what happens, you would probably be quite horrified. And I'm happy to send you some footage afterwards. So, all right, this might sound like a stupid question, but again, this is something that most people actually don't know. Were you aware that a cow has to be made pregnant to produce milk?
I was.
Yeah. And do you know how the farmer does that?
Artificial insemination.
Right,
generally.
right. So it's essentially so vegans would see this essentially as a sexual violation of their reproductive system. So a farmer, shoves a steel rod into her, puts his fist into her, and then manipulates her reproductive organs and squirts semen into her that comes from a masturbated bull. They have these weird bestiality devices essentially that jack off bulls to collect their semen and then impregnate cows. So it's quite literally bestiality. It's something that if someone was to do to your dog or cat, if you had at home, you would likely consider them a sicko. But these are the things we just do to cows because, they're just cows. And this is kind of the system we're born into. And we don't really, it's called carnism, right? The way that we see certain animals, and we have different views about animals having certain purposes, but for no real kind of consistent reason, right? Like, would you agree, by the way, I'll just ask you that actually, would you agree that if someone was to, masturbate a dog for his sperm and then, essentially rape a female dog with a steel rod and squirt semen into her, would you see that as unethical?
Yes, I would.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is how the female cow is made pregnant. And then
right there, I'd like to object and say that that's not necessarily the case. So I don't think you can use that as an argument against the consumption. While a majority of farms do this practice, there are a fairly small minority that do not. So if we were to look purely in these instances, would you still consider that consumption unethical?
Oh yeah, with or without that bit, we would still consider it unethical because there's a lot more things that happen. And we also, I just want to tell you essentially what the actual, the doctrine of veganism is that animals are here with us, not for us. So we don't believe that it's ethical to exploit animals for their bodies. We want to respect those animals' bodily autonomy. We don't see them as machines, food, vending machines here to serve humans. But I'm happy to also go into the rest of the practices that are ultimately going to happen, that are just going to be inherent in dairy farming, right? So
yes, I'd love that because while I agree with you on that objection, since it's not universal, I don't think that works as a standalone argument.
Yeah, I mean, there might be some farms where they let the bull and the cow mate naturally or something. But in any case, there's going to be a whole cycle of exploitation that's coming from that. I mean, ultimately, they're doing this for a self-serving reason, right? For profit, and they're going to use this bull and this cow's babies for some pretty messed up stuff. So, do you know what happens to a calf if he's male in the dairy industry?
That's a broad question, but generally killed.
Yeah. So the male is going to be killed because he's no use. So he's just seen as like a disposable commodity. So he'll be sold off for veal or for beef, whatever. And if you look at some of the footage of how this is done, even at these kind of local farms, and it's often out of sight and out of mind of the consumer, it's pretty. Well, it's really, really evil, actually. They lead these babies into a mass grave, essentially, and many of these farms shoot them one by one in the head. I've seen them bludgeon these calves to death with pickaxes. There's some really horrific shit that will happen to those male calves. Now, a female calf is going to meet the same fate as her mother, right? So she's going to grow up essentially being a sex slave to that industry, having her reproductive organs just used as a machine year upon year upon year to lactate, to produce babies for veal. And then once she's no longer profitable to the farmer makes one last profit off her body by, what happens to her once she's no longer can produce milk?
Well, she dies.
Well, yeah.
Well, she's killed. I guess that's a little bit of a passive way for me to put it.
Exactly. Yeah. So they'll sell her off to have a throat cut, whatever, at the slaughterhouse. Now, what I've described there, do you think that I mean, these are ultimately the inherent practices in any kind of dairy farming. This is just what's going to happen. Do you think that now that I've mentioned all that to you, that there is an ethical way to consume dairy?
Yes, there's still an ethical way to consume dairy. I don't think any of these arguments still prove that by necessity it is unethical to consume dairy. It merely demonstrates that in that context it would be unethical.
There might be some kind of weird, hypothetical we could come up with that it might be ethical to consume it, I'm sure. But ultimately, when you're buying dairy, including from this, small local farm or whatever that you see, or, however it's done, if you're just going to be buying a pizza or a yogurt or a milkshake or some cheese, this is just what's happening, right? What I've mentioned there.
Yes, that's fair enough. And again, this isn't something I'm really disputing. The fundamental thing I am trying to claim is that while I generally agree with veganism, I do not think that by necessity the consumption of animal products is unethical. And I don't think I've seen a strong argument to demonstrate that.
Yeah. When you say that, are you talking about there are some scenarios like, I don't know, dumpster diving or roadkill or something like that? Or are you talking about the farming there that I've just mentioned? Assuming that happened, like you acknowledge that that's happening, right? Every time that you buy a dairy product, the process we just talked about then.
Not every time, but yes, generally.
I mean, I would say it's every time because that's how it's going to happen, right? The dairy industry.
Well, it's not every time. It's just the vast majority of the times. For instance, my neighbor owned sheep for years, and none of these practices ever took place. And I could consume sheep milk if I so desired, which I did not. So I never did, but if I could have consumed sheep milk without any of these practices you mentioned.
But there's still going to be some kind of violence and abuse inherent in that. You might not have seen it, but, ultimately those those lambs are being bred for a business model, right? Once
actually, no, this is non-commercial. She did not sell them. I guess pets would be closest to the way to describe them.
Okay,
I think in that instance, what I'm saying is I do not think it is logical to claim it would be unethical to consume milk, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, without knowing all the in and outs of this scenario that you mentioned, which is kind of out there and just not what's happening in the vast majority of cases, it's hard for me to kind of say.
I know I'm putting you in a bit of a pickle here, but that's kind of the point. Is what I'm saying is I agree with you on almost everything you're saying. I think in the vast majority of cases, it is unethical to consume animal products, and I think everything we can do to progress away from that is good. But I do not think, as I said before, that by necessity, consuming animal products is unethical in any way.
Well, again, I'd just like to go back to what's happening when you buy an animal product from the store. So you go into the supermarket and you buy a yogurt or some cheese or whatever it is. Is there any... Would you at least acknowledge now that those are the practices that are happening when you buy that? It's not going to be like this thing you talk about with the sheep in your...
No, I already acknowledged this and I agreed with you that I think that is deeply problematic.
Okay, awesome. So you would... I mean, after this conversation today, will you buy an animal product from the store?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because I am unethical, I think, fundamentally.
Okay, I like your honesty.
I'm working. Legitimately, though, I am working towards trying to consume fewer animal products, but it is still something I do. And I think for now, as I step towards trying to get more ethically sourced products, is at least a start, and I strive to continue farther.
Yeah, okay. Good stuff. Well, look, I appreciate that you're kind of honest about that, because a lot of people will come up with, you know, these kind of bullshit excuses for why they buy animal products from the store. But it seems in your case, you don't think there actually is an ethical justification. Like, you would say that when you're buying like a steak or a yogurt or some cheese or some eggs from the supermarket, you are just doing something unethical.
Yes, I would generally agree with that. I think, like I said before, there are levels to it. I think eating bacon is worse than eating eggs, for example. But I do think that all are ultimately problematic behaviors.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. I guess there's not much for me to convince you on with the supermarket stuff then. I mean, I think it's the ball is ultimately in your court with that one. It's just up to you to say to yourself after this conversation today, you know, when you go into that supermarket, shit, do I want to fund this horror anymore? Ultimately, the ball is ultimately in your court. I don't think I need to convince you much on the supermarket thing. You've acknowledged that is unethical, and that's great. Okay, assuming then that you were to stop buying animal products from the store, assuming you were to say, yeah, do you know what? I've got no excuse for this anymore. I'm just going to stop buying any. I'm not going to fund the farming industry anymore. What would the stuff be that you were eating, and what wouldn't you be convinced that is unethical? Would it just be like backyard eggs and stuff like that?
For instance, I think it would be perfectly morally justifiable to eat insects. Certainly things like honey, I think, are perfectly defensible, and comparable products. I think.
Okay. Yeah, where to start with this one? Maybe let's start with the honey. Now, I know that the honey thing is a bit of a hard sell to most people.
Yeah, I would be very impressed if you could convince me on this one. I've never heard even vaguely compelling arguments in this field.
Okay, yeah. What I would sort of say, again, this just encompasses the about the vegan position. Ultimately, is that we believe that all creatures, great and small, are here for their own reasons. They're not here to serve us for anything. And bees ultimately make honey for themselves. They are sentient creatures, at least to a certain degree. We don't know how sentient they are, and we don't assume them to be as sentient as, say, a cow or a pig. We do know they're thinking, conscious creatures, though. We can see in their behaviors they're intelligent, conscious creatures, and we see that they have wants with regards to their honey making, right? That's why we have to put on that suit when we go in and steal their honey from them, because they don't want us to take it. So what vegans say ultimately is, when you go vegan, you don't give anything up. You just stop taking what isn't yours. So it's that kind of principle. Again, I totally understand that you might not see it as unethical as some of the other animal industries, but there are.
Well, it's certainly not as unethical. I don't think you'd dispute that.
Yeah, it might not be as unethical, but I still think it's unethical, and I still think that humans have no right to ultimately enslave insects for their produce, the fruits of their labor, steal the stuff that they make for themselves from them, and think that we're entitled to the stuff that other creatures make for themselves.
Okay, ultimately. Well, couldn't you extend this argument farther then and say it's unethical to consume plants? Because you're with the language you're using, it's I think it's a bit of an exaggeration of what a bee is. It's like saying we're by eating an apple, you're robbing the tree of what it made for itself and is trying to spread its life with. And I think what's more important is we take into account the capacity that something has for suffering. And I do not think the capacity a bee has for suffering is great, if at all, and certainly not even vaguely comparable to that of even a fucking dumbass chicken.
Well, I don't think chickens are dumbass, by the way. I think they're a lot more intelligent than we give them credit for.
Yeah, having lived with chickens, this is a hard sell, but I'll grant you it if that's your position.
Yeah, I mean, the chickens that you had, would you acknowledge they had like different personalities and stuff? They, you know, in the same way a dog or a cat would, they had certain enjoyments and certain personalities, and they recognized faces and stuff.
Certainly would not say they recognize faces, at least that I could tell. Personality is a bit of an overstatement in my view, but they did have different behaviors. Some were more energetic, others lazier. Yeah. But I don't think this is indicative of intelligence.
But you see have you seen like the videos of them on YouTube and stuff, like being able to recognize like card faces, being able to count, running to their human when they get home and stuff, and greeting them, and all these cute little things that they can do, and when they show off the intelligent things that they can do as well. There is a lot of stuff out there, but I think we you know, we downplay it because, again, we see them as these kind of machines. We don't really take the time to get to know chickens properly because I guess we're too busy kind of using them, commodifying them for their eggs, for their meat, and so on.
Well, I mean, ironically, I was actually in my point saying that chickens were significantly more intelligent than other forms of life, but
yeah.
Funny that I'm now insulting their intelligence, but
Indeed,
mainly what I was saying is I don't think they're something like a chicken. You know, something like a bee doesn't compare to a chicken when it comes into its capacity to suffer, just like something like a chicken doesn't compare to a more intelligent animal such as a pig in its capacity to comprehend and feel suffering.
So, yeah, now I don't know to what extent insects can suffer, but I'm pretty sure that they can to a certain extent. They do have fairly primitive, I don't know if it's like nociceptors or whatever it is. They have something that makes them avoid a certain level of pain. I don't know to what extent they feel pain, but they would certainly feel some sort of like discomfort or something that says don't do that if they were to go near like a heat source or something like that, or they would fly away.
I grant you that. I'm saying that intellectually a bee is so uncomplex that it cannot it lacks desires and emotions the same way that more developed animals will, which is why it is not morally equivalent to, I don't know quite how to phrase this, put a bee into a certain situation compared to a pig, because a pig's capacity for various more complex emotions is far, far, far greater.
Out of interest, how do you know that bees are sufficiently low in intellect as you say they are? What's your kind of reasoning for that?
I don't technically know it. Just like I don't know that a bacteria doesn't have the intellect of Einstein. It's just an inference I've made based on research I've read.
Yeah, the thing is, with bacteria and with plants, right, I think that would be greatly trivializing insect sentience and suffering if we were to talk about them in the same category, because those are just completely insentient life forms, whereas insects,
how do you know that?
Well, we do know that. So science has established that plants and bacteria are just not sentient. They lack any kind of physiology that would say that they're sentient. They don't have a brain, a central nervous system, or anything. They don't have the requirements to be sentient. They're just like a...
I'm aware. I was just being
all right.
vaguely annoying to throw back your point at you in a not so great way. It was just a joke mainly.
All right.
To say that in the same way that you know that a plant isn't sentient, I know that a bee does not have comparable ability to comprehend various things in the same way that most mammals, especially more complex mammals, do.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of diverse in what ways certain animals, you know, outperform other animals in certain ways. But bees absolutely could outperform certain animals in certain intelligence tasks. On my website, carnismdebunked.com, I've actually got a page on there called Animal Intelligence. There is a video on there on the bees section. I've got one of them pulling strings in order to obtain food. So bees know how to like operate sort of tools. If you know, if you know what I'm kind of saying there, they would actually know how to pull a lever or a string or whatever in order to obtain food. They were actually the first ever creature to know that the earth is round as well. They have this ability to map out the position of the sun in order to obtain the best nectar. And they engage in intelligent behaviors as well, sort of these dances and stuff that they do for mating and stuff. And they're very industrious creatures who know about making honey as their food source and storing it and being very resourceful in that sense. I think bees are actually pretty damn intelligent guys. I'm not saying they are as intelligent in many ways as mammals, but I actually think there is a case that they would outperform mammals in certain ways, actually.
Give one example.
Well, I think the example of that I've got on my website of them pulling strings in order to obtain food is good. I mean, I could potentially send you the link to that after this, but I think you'd be quite impressed by it. But there's like if you were to just go on YouTube and type stuff like bees performing like intelligence task or bee intelligence, there's a lot of neat stuff you would see them doing on there that would probably quite surprise you.
But that's not outperforming mammals. Loads of mammals can be taught to use tools.
Yeah, I mean, there might be cases where they, don't outperform them, but there's also cases in which I think there would. It's different from animal to animal. Like I'm just looking here. I've typed in bee intelligence on YouTube. This first article comes up by Science magazine. Bees have more brains than we bargained for. Bumblebees show an unexpected level of cognitive flexibility when it comes to solving problems in exchange for sugar water. True facts, bees that play with balls and do math. Bees learn to play soccer. This is on Discovery Canada.
I'd watch that.
There you go. So look, I think there's some stuff there that you could maybe watch, but I basically just think that I'm not some kind of expert on insect intelligence or anything like that, but I do think that you're underestimating greatly the intellect of bees.
It's possible, and again, my main point is I don't think they have. All of these are more skill related, if that makes sense. Of it's an input output sort of situation where they have this stimulus, they make this reaction, like with your example of them stinging someone who's trying to take their honey. That doesn't demonstrate to me that they would have the ability to sort of emote in the way that mammals can. And that's something that I think is critical in this discussion, because I think the capacity for suffering is what matters most.
Yeah, I think capacity for suffering is important, but I also think animals should be granted an inherent right not to be exploited for their produce. And I do think that, like, for example, let's just go back to the stinging thing you mentioned a moment ago about how if you were to take their honey from them. The fact that this may sound like a silly thing, but the fact that bees have eyes, that means they're looking around, they're taking in information about their environment, and they're making rational judgments. They're making decisions on what they see. Just the fact that insects, animals have eyes, that is proof that they're actually making conscious decisions about their surroundings and then acting on those decisions, right?
Not necessarily, but I'll grant that just for the sake of the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that is just a case of that's what's happening. And I think, look, I'm not saying bee intelligence is so sufficient that, we should grant them the right to vote or fly a plane or something. I just think it's, sufficient enough that we should at least just respect their right to not be exploited and to not be seen as a food source for humans. Ultimately, that's all just veganism is. It's like you don't have to see all these animals exactly on the same level as everyone else and blah, blah, blah. You just have to grant that their intelligence, their sentience, their cognitive abilities is sufficient enough to be granted rights, to be rights bearers.
That's fair. My question for you actually is, with this worldview, how would you feel about the consumption of animals that are predators? Wouldn't that logically be justified?
Annoyingly, there is this little infighting going on in the vegan movement about this very idea. There is this idea of killing what's called odd order predators, whatever the hell that means. I think it's predators that eat just herbivores, but not the predators of herbivores, or something weird like that. I don't have a good answer, a perfect answer to this scenario. I think it just results in potentially insane bullet bites, for example, killing non-vegans and eating non-vegans. So it's maybe it might make sense from a pure logic standpoint, but I just don't think it's a bullet bite we should engage in. Ought I go out and kill like Inuits who have to eat, who might have to eat animals to survive in our Antarctica and Greenland or something like that? So yeah, I tend to err away from biting the bullet on saying that we should kill and eat predatory animals. Yeah.
Okay, well, I just use that example because that's another one that I think is at the very least interesting.
Yeah,
because it's another kind of holdup I have with the notion of complete veganism, because I don't think you could logically argue against it necessarily. Like if I eat, I don't know, fucking crocodile jerky or some shit, all that crocodile is doing is going to eat other animals that you wouldn't want to eat.
Yeah.
So by eating the crocodile, you probably killed fewer things. And if you're trying to minimize the number of animals that are getting eaten, that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, look, I think from a pure logic standpoint, it would be sort of hard to argue against. But as I say, I think it just results in weird, more kind of deontic bullet bites. From a utilitarian standpoint, of course, you could very easily make the argument that, yes, if I eat the crocodile, that results in fewer animals suffering and blah, blah, blah. And all that's happening is you're killing a killer of other animals and all this kind of stuff. But I just want to say as well that veganism is, I don't think that veganism should necessarily encompass killing others because they kill to eat. That would include, if I could kill a non-vegan who's never ever going to go vegan and get away with it, I still wouldn't do that. So it's like,
well, yeah, you'd have to go sort of non-vegan, I guess, to do that. So I guess if you're not eating it, it technically doesn't break anything, but like kind of goes against the whole vibe,
Yeah, but in any case, look, the animals people are eating, it's not the case that, when you go into a supermarket, you're eating just these crocodiles and these lions and these hyenas, whatever. The animals being farmed and exploited and massacred en masse are just all different kinds of animals, be they herbivores and or whatever they are, prey animals, predator animals, but most of them are actually bred into existence for the purpose of being slaves, subservient to the human species. And veganism just rejects that animals should be food sources, should be machines here to serve humans, that they should all be rights bearers. And we would even say that, predatory animals are rights bearers themselves, just in the same way that non-vegans have human rights as well.
I'm sorry. I'm just imagining a world where it's just vegans who have human rights and everyone else is like, it'd be interesting.
Absolutely. But yeah, look, I mean, did you have any other kind of questions for me at all?
Yeah. I think the final thing I really wanted to get your perspective on is hunting in the context of areas with overpopulated species. For example, Michigan is having a horrible deer overpopulation issue. Yeah. And I'm not sold that it would be morally wrong during hunting season to kill a deer and eat it, given that in the condition they currently are, that deer is probably going to get infected with some gnarly disease and die after 9 months of suffering.
Yeah, so
obviously that's an exaggeration of the situation, but it's sort of a hypothetical to get the point across.
Yeah, now the thing with hunting deer and stuff, well, for a start, hunters generally tend to pick off the healthy kind of fast animals and stuff, whereas the predators will kill these kind of diseased, slow, weak ones. With the idea of the overpopulation stuff, we have sterilization guns now, I believe. So I would just sterilize them if there's an overpopulation issue. But any time that animals are overpopulated in a wild area, it's generally the fault of humans. So I don't know if it's the case. Was it Michigan, you said?
Yes, I think so. I actually think we were talking about flying wolves in, which I'm
Right.
sure wouldn't lead to any unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, I think this is just another one of these chaotic things of humans fucking up the natural world when they intervene. And I think the reason that the deer are overpopulated there is probably something to do with human intervention. And it's just our cock up as usual. I think it would be unfair to take it out on the deer. Especially when humans are overpopulated in many areas. And yet I think it's, what the nerve we have for us to see certain animals as pests or overpopulated and blah, 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 when we're obviously the huge pest and overpopulated on this planet in terms of what we do. So, yeah, no, I wouldn't see it as ethical to shoot them unless it was just shooting them with a dart to sterilize them. But I certainly wouldn't introduce wolves either.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Cool. Yeah, look, man, I hope that this conversation has been fruitful, and that I'm really glad that you acknowledged the stuff about buying animal products from the supermarket. So it's just about giving yourself that little nudge now after this to say, I have no justification to buy it. If there's anything you're unconvinced on, assuming, and I hope you do stop buying animal products from the supermarket. If there's anything you're unconvinced on still with regards to eating animal products in other forms, I guess I could just send you some stuff on that. If I can't convince you, I can't. But I guess I could just send you maybe some links and stuff on honey and stuff. Perhaps I could send you later the article that actually first convinced me about honey being unethical when I was first looking into going vegan in about 2012, which I found
I'd love to read
it. Awesome, man. Well, look, Galen, it was nice speaking to you, man. And yeah, I will send you some stuff after this. And I really appreciate you coming on and your honesty as well. That was good.
All right. Pleasure, George. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, dude. Yep. See you later.